and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. During a meeting between leaders of the United States and Japan at the White House, U.S. President Donald Trump said he expects Tokyo to play a greater role in protecting the Strait of Hormuz, stressing that Washington has invested significant resources in defending Japan. Prime Minister Takaichi sought to reaffirm her alliance with the U.S., stressing the importance of preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Qatar Energy has announced that it may have to declare force majeure on long-term LNG contracts with key importers, including South Korea, for up to 5 years, after Iran carried out a direct attack on Qatar's critical LNG infrastructure. With only a day left until the BTS comeback concert at Gwanghwamun Square, major traffic controls will be in place in central Seoul, with Sejongdae-do closed to vehicles from 9 p.m. today until 6 a.m. Sunday. We begin this morning in the United States, where President Donald Trump has urged Japan to step up support during a meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi, as Washington works to keep the Strait of Hormuz open amid the escalating war involving Iran. Our Lee Seung-jae starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump has called on Japan to step up its support as the United States works to keep the Strait of Hormuz open amid the ongoing war involving Israel and Iran. Speaking during a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi at the White House on Thursday, Trump noted Japan's heavy reliance on the strategic waterway for its energy imports. He also pointed to the long-standing security relationship between the two allies, highlighting the presence of roughly 45,000 U.S. troops stationed in Japan. Trump said he expects Tokyo to play a greater role, stressing that the United States has invested significant resources in defending Japan. He added that he would not be surprised if Japan increases its support, though he did not specify what form such assistance might take. The Strait of Hormuz, which carries about 1/5 of the world's oil supply, has effectively been choked off by the intensifying conflict. The disruption has fueled concerns over rising global oil prices and mounting inflationary pressure. Japan is particularly vulnerable, with more than 90% of its crude oil imports passing through the strait. Trump also drew attention after responding to a question from a Japanese journalist about why Washington did not inform its European and Asian allies in advance of strikes on Iran.
Well, one thing, you don't want to signal too much. You know, when we go in, we went in very hard, and we didn't tell anybody about it because we wanted surprise. Who knows better about surprise than Japan? Okay? Why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor? Okay? Right? You know, he's asking me, no, you believe in surprise, I think much more so than us.
For her part, Prime Minister Takaichi underscored the importance of preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons while condemning Tehran's attacks across the Middle East. She reaffirmed Japan's commitment to regional stability and close cooperation with the United States as tensions continue to rise.
Japan condemns Iran's actions, such as attacking the neighboring region and also the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz, as a matter of fact. My fellow minister, Foreign Minister Motegi, also had a direct exchange with the Iranian foreign minister and urged Iran to stop such activities.
The Prime Minister added that she firmly believes President Trump is the only leader capable of achieving global peace, citing what she described as an increasingly severe international security environment. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
So as we just heard, as the United States wants allies to step up on the Strait of Hormuz, Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi met President Donald Trump just days after Trump lashed out at European and Asian allies for rejecting his call to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. For more on this, we're joined today by Dr. Kim Mi-kyung, senior researcher at Gyeongsang National University. Dr. Kim, thanks for making the time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Dr. Kim, some say Prime Minister Takaichi had the bad luck of being one of the first allies to meet President Trump in person since the start of the war. What do you make of the summit yesterday?
Yes, The timing of her visit was actually very, very tough. She, I think, was under a lot of pressure. And as you have mentioned, NATO member countries, Germany and Spain, for instance, said no outright to President Trump's request for support, while the UK remains lukewarm. France suggested negotiation. Frustrated, or I should say angered by the lack of support of the NATO member countries, President Trump has begun to pressure Asian countries that use the Strait of Hormuz to transport oil and natural gas. He specifically mentioned China, Japan, and South Korea. In justifying his demands for the Asian countries' support, President Trump cited some statistics during the summit meeting with Prime Minister Takaichi. For instance, 95% of China's, 90% of Japan's, and 35% of Korea's energy sources pass through the strait. And here, let me remind you of the fact that President Trump sometimes does not get the numbers right. For instance, when he talks about U.S. Troops stationing in South Korea, he says the number is between 40,000 and 45,000, and Korea does not bear the burden by paying the price to host them. It's not true. I mean, Korea picks up the half of the tab. So with that caveat in the mind, President Trump is saying that the countries who use the strait must do their burden sharing. And at this point, we have to ask the following questions. First, should China's reliance on the strait be the biggest? Why did he postpone his Beijing trip by about 6 weeks? And why did he still want to hold summit meeting with Japan? Those questions come to our mind naturally. Both summit meetings were pre-planned and agreed upon beforehand. So I believe President Trump thinks that Japan will be very, very agreeable with his demands, and Tokyo government will politely cooperate with Washington. So by doing that, interestingly, President Trump inadvertently revealed that China and Japan have different priorities in his power hierarchy. In other words, Mr. Trump has convinced, I think, Mr. Xi Jinping that he is wary of dealing with Beijing vis-a-vis Tokyo.
I see. And like you just mentioned, South Korea was one of the countries that President Trump mentioned should send support to the Strait of Hormuz. So how might Japan's stance on the strait affect South Korea's position on providing support to safeguard the waterway?
Let me think. That is, during the press conference with Japanese media after closed-door summit meeting, Prime Minister Takaichi reported that she expressed caution in dispatching self-defense force to the Middle East to President Trump. She mentioned about the pacifist constitution as the red line that should not be crossed. Prime Minister Takaichi also mentioned her own request to President Trump that Japan wants to see earliest possible de-escalation of conflict in the Middle East. Yet, we know that there are precedents where Japan sent troops to support the U.S. For instance, former Prime Minister Koizumi, for example, enacted a special law in 2001 to assist George W. Bush's war on terror. And another precedent regards former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, who also sent troops to the Strait of Hormuz in 2019 for the theoretical mission of investigation and research. So we should be mindful of the fact that Japan sent troops after war was over in both cases. Against this backdrop, we get to see a link between the two stances taken by Ms. Takaichi. That is, if the conflict is de-escalated and finally settled, she could cite those precedents in order to justify the deployment of self-defense force. Considering the very low approval rating of Iran war in domestic Japan at about 9%, she would need to be very cautious not to provoke her supporters by hastily accommodating President Trump's demands in this very unpopular war. Okay, then, regarding your question about what does that mean for South Korea, what should we do? We need to remind Washington that the context of South Korea and Japan differ widely. That is, if South Korea dispatches our troops to the Middle East, South Korea's security will be compromised greatly. That is particularly so with North Korea's latest rocket launch provocations and also U.S. redeployment of Patriot missiles and THAADs out of South Korea's territory bound for the Middle East. We can argue that our own national defense should be our top priority, and we cannot afford to take a risk of mobilizing our own troops to the Middle East. And I believe that would make a lot of common sense to whoever listens to that kind of argument.
I see. It's a complicated issue. And during the summit, President Trump also brought up Pearl Harbor when asked about why the United States didn't give allies like Japan a heads up before striking Iran. What do you think he meant by that?
You know, I personally was very surprised to hear his remark about Pearl Harbor. But when we think about him, Mr. Trump is an alpha male with business background. Now he is the leader of the most powerful country in the world. His sense of humor can be acerbic, quick, and potentially offensive. Yet his status saves him from possible retaliations for making those offensive comments, even to the leaders of other sovereign countries. Here, let me gently remind you of his unnecessarily candid remarks about French President Mr. Macron's sunglasses at the Davos Forum, and his curt belittlement of British Prime Minister Starmer by comparing him with Winston Churchill. Even though people cannot retaliate given the power imbalance between the offender and the offended, you know, the people who felt belittled cannot forget the horrible feeling, you know? So I think more and more leaders of the world are turning their backs against the US and President Trump. And I think his mentioning of Japan's surprise attack of Pearl Harbor was one of those moments when he did not think through before spitting the words out. And I also remember Ms. Takaichi's look on her facial expression, that she was very surprised. And I think she even made some moaning sound, you know. And let me also share this information that the Japanese people were not happy with President Trump's Pearl Harbor comment. And when the summit meeting was live broadcast, real time in Japan, the most popular comment left in the site was this word, saite. Saite means the worst in Japanese. So I think the Japanese citizens were equally surprised by President Trump's possibly offensive remark about Japan's surprise attack against the U.S. in 1941.
Right. That comment was a surprise for many. All right, Dr. Kim, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
As the conflict in the Middle East escalates, concerns over long-term energy supply disruption intensify. South Korea, one of the largest importers of Qatari LNG, may have to brace for the termination of its energy contracts. Our An Seung-jin has more.
Fears over a global energy crisis intensify after major energy facilities in the Middle East were damaged. Qatar Energy announced on Friday that it may invoke force majeure on long-term LNG contracts with key importers including South Korea, China, Italy, and Belgium for up to 5 years. Its CEO said the decision comes after a direct attack on its critical LNG infrastructure in Ras Laffan Industrial City. The strike by Iran targeted a facility responsible for roughly 20% of global LNG supply. 2 LNG production lines and 1 gas-to-liquids facility were destroyed. The damage knocked out 17% of Qatar Energy's total export capacity, with repairs expected to take 3 to 5 years. According to Qatari authorities, the attack is estimated to cut the country's annual output by approximately 12.9 million tons. This attack came as a retaliatory strike by Iran on energy infrastructure across Gulf states, including Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia.
Unfortunately, this act of sabotage reflects nothing but an aggressive and irresponsible policy and a dangerous escalation by the Iranian side.
South Korea is one of the largest importers of Qatari LNG. Although it has diversified supply sources to include the U.S. and Australia, Qatar still accounts for roughly 20% of its imports, with long-term contracts covering about 6.1 million tons annually. The state-run Korea Gas Corporation stated that current reserves exceed mandatory levels and can sustain demand through the end of the year. However, prolonged disruptions could force countries into fierce competition for limited LNG supplies on the spot market, driving up prices not only for industrial sectors, but also energy costs for households. Analysts warn this damage could have a long-lasting impact and that the current conflict and closure of the Strait of Hormuz could delay reconstruction efforts for Qatar's energy infrastructure. An Seung-jin, Arirang News.
And President Lee Jae-myung has called for the need to find stable energy supply lines as the Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed. Speaking at a meeting with his aides on Thursday, he said the country needs to make desperate efforts to secure even a single drop of additional oil. The president appreciated the UAE for its cooperation in helping South Korea secure 24 million barrels of crude oil. Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Won-sik has agreed with Abu Dhabi on the oil supply during his recent trip to the UAE. And South Korea is preparing for massive crowds as BTS makes a full group comeback in central Seoul tomorrow, with up to 260,000 people expected to gather in the Gwanghwamun area. Major traffic controls will be in place with Sejongdae-ro closed for vehicles from 9 p.m. today until 6 a.m. Sunday. On the day of the event, nearby roads will be shut in stages, while buses will be rerouted. Subway access will also be restricted. Some station entrances will close from early morning, with all entrances shut after 3 p.m. Saturday, as trains will pass through without stopping. The Seoul city government will also run an on-site command center, mobilizing around 8,000 safety personnel, while 6,000 police officers will be deployed. As fans around the world await BTS return, the title of their upcoming album is sparking renewed interest in the Korean word Arirang, which also happens to be the name of the station you're watching. Our Chung Hae-rim tells us more.
The countdown to BTS's return is almost over, but as the hype builds, the album's title Arirang is drawing attention. For international fans, this single word is sparking curiosity.
Arirang? I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. It's like something to do with traditional music. Traditional Korean music.
So their new album's called Arirang, but I'm not entirely sure what that means. I would assume it's something to do with like unity or
Actually, I heard it's like a folk song of Korea. Because BTS is from Korea, of course they want to show to the world.
During a recent Weverse live broadcast, the group's leader explained the thought process behind naming their highly anticipated album.
한국을 상징하는 무언가가 같이 들어가면 좋겠다라는 생각을 하다가 이제 아리랑이라는 키워드를 좀 불러오게 되었는데.
With the release of BTS's latest album on Friday, many fans are wondering what Arirang actually means. So, what is the story behind this iconic melody? Simply put, Arirang is Korea's most famous traditional folk song. But for Koreans, it is much more than just that. Passed down orally through generations with countless regional variations, the song carries the universal emotions of Han, a deep sense of sorrow, and Hung, a resilient joy.
Arirang is a song that symbolizes Korean culture and has been with us throughout our history and lives. It was the song our people sang to endure hardships in unfamiliar environments abroad. You could say this historical experience has led to our deep affection for it.
What makes Arirang meaningful today is that it is no longer just a song of the past, but is being rediscovered and reinterpreted by a new generation. Experts say BTS is playing a crucial role in this ongoing evolution.
BTS's choice of Arirang is an example of modernly expanding its value through music that resonates across race, culture, and social status.
From a song rooted in Korea's past to a symbol reaching audiences worldwide, Arirang is once again finding new meaning today. 정혜림, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that 20 days of U.S.-Israeli air attacks have decimated Iran's ability to enrich uranium or produce ballistic missiles. During a press conference in Jerusalem on Thursday, Netanyahu said Israel acted alone in bombing energy infrastructure for Iran's South Pars gas field. He said that following President Trump's request, Israel would hold off on future attacks on such energy infrastructure. But Netanyahu warned that removing the regime in Iran would still require a, quote, ground component. In the U.S., the Pentagon on Thursday requested an emergency $200 billion to fund the war against Iran. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defended the massive price tag, telling reporters, quote, it takes money to kill bad guys. Hegseth said the funds are necessary to ensure the military remains properly equipped to eliminate threats, but stopped short of confirming the final figure, noting the amount could change during negotiations. The request would need approval from a Congress already wary of the national debt. It comes on top of an $840 billion defense budget signed just last month. Several major European nations and Japan issued a joint statement on Thursday condemning Iran's attacks on civilian infrastructure and de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz. In the statement, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Japan declared their readiness to make appropriate efforts to secure safe passage through the strait. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko on Thursday pardoned 250 political prisoners, following a high-level diplomatic deal with the United States. In exchange, Washington lifted sanctions on 2 Belarusian state banks and the National Finance Ministry. The pardons mark the largest single release of political prisoners in the country's history. Belarus's opposition leader in exile hailed the release as a, quote, moment of great relief and hope. Biazna, a Belarusian human rights group, said that before the release, there were more than 1,100 political prisoners in the country.
Today, more
marks the spring equinox when day and night are nearly equal in length. And right on cue, we could feel a taste of warmer days from now on. But it was still a cold start this morning, especially in inland regions where temperatures have dipped below freezing. But pleasant spring weather continues through the weekend. It's going to stay mostly sunny with comfortable air quality in most places, great for outdoor plans. However, Jeju Island could see a bit of rain starting Sunday afternoon. And this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 14 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Busan both topping out at 17 degrees under sunny skies with clean air quality nationwide. We can put away our winter jackets now as much warmer spring days are ahead for next week. But a temperature swing of around 15 degrees Celsius will continue, so please keep that in mind and do dress accordingly.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.